Abigail is like this beautiful 5-year-old who loves to draw. She loves to dance. She loves to eat French fries. She has lots of friends. But she's just you look at her and I say, you wouldn't know what she went through. I went from that I was in Israel for Simchat Torah to see my daughter, and that it was going to be this beautiful week, and to this moment of hearing what was happening. And I was in a hotel where missiles were flying over, and we were running to and from a safe room. But learning what happened to my niece Smadar and her husband Roe, and at that time we believed Abigail, 3 years old, was murdered also, and that there was a 6 and a 9-year-old in a closet, alone. My sister-in-law was in Bulgaria. She couldn't do anything. And my other niece and her husband were across the kibbutz, and they had to be quiet. I felt so useless. People started calling me from America to find out what had happened. And I knew leaders, and I knew so many people. And all of a sudden, people just kept calling. And I literally took a note, and I copied and pasted and just kept texting it. Because what I understood was that we were being attacked. There was a war being perpetrated against Israel and the people. And I always like to say they weren't just Jews, they were Muslims and Christians and Buddhists and Hindu and people from over 30 nations. And for me, I kind of went into that fight mode, which was, I'm going to tell the story. And I'm not going to just sit in my room and get drunk. I'm going to keep telling the story. And what I learned the next day was that people were saying, go home, go back, because I'm from America. I'm from New York. And so I got on a plane, which was really challenging. But I just kept being busy because I couldn't let myself go to that place where I was hearing about those hundreds and hundreds of young people who were dancing and being massacred. And just the unknown of what was really happening, but that my family was hiding. They were all hiding. And I couldn't go there, so I knew I had to go and do something to help them, but it wasn't going to be physically in Israel. So that was what I did. But it was, I think about that plane ride, and I looked around, and everyone was sort of like in my position, which was we were leaving something we didn't want to leave, but we had to leave. And I just remember looking around and thinking we were all just numb. These 3 children have experienced what we would never even imagine anybody, an adult, let alone should experience. But these 3 children are resilient, they're beautiful, and they live with, and they're being raised. They're now the children of my niece and her husband, and there's 6 beautiful children, and they will always live with what happened on October 7th. But you have children, so many little kids out there, and what we want to give them is as much strength and as much resilience, but as much love and warmth as we can. Went from total despair that a 3-year-old was murdered to, okay, what can I do to help her, to help bring her back? And, I think about my niece who survived and my sister-in-law and the amount of times we spoke. And their question always was, are you going to bring Abigail home? Now, I knew Liz, was not going to bring Abigail home alone. But I also knew that if I could get her story to be a story that people understood. And think about it, 35 children. But Abigail was the most famous child in America of all of them. Became in Israel and internationally. And I think that was because I was one of the first people to go out and really advocate for Abigail and all the hostages. So I took the picture with the 250 people also stolen. But being able to show them, but show Abigail, gave Abigail's story, and obviously that she was in her father's arms, and that they thought that she had been killed, and that she had actually run to find this 3-year-old is running through this beautiful neighborhood with over 300 terrorists armed in military uniform, and this little child is running, and the first house she gets to, no one is there, and the second house she gets to, she's brought in. And I think to myself, what resilience. And as I learn this story, and I still don't have all the details, but I know that I can go fight for her, I'm like, if she's that resilient, why not I? This is Abigail. It's on the cover of the book, but this photo I was given the day I learned that Abigail had survived. I asked my brother-in-law to send me a picture because I did understand people needed to see what she looked like. And I remember looking at this face in her eyes and just thinking, I'm going to bring you home. I had no idea what that meant. But how could we let this child not be fought for? And what I understood was that other people got to see this face, and they were saying, how can we help you? And I'll tell you that I gave this photo to a woman named Susan Collins, who's a US Senator. And I met her literally like a week and a half after October 7th on Capitol Hill. And she was with other women senators, Republican women. And I looked at her and I looked at these women and I told them the story that we knew at that time. And they were crying. These are very powerful women. And just hearing what happened to Abigail broke them. And I gave Susan Collins the photo. And a few days later, as you read, she was in Israel. She showed my daughter the photo. She showed the world the photo. She kept that photo. But what it kind of showed me was that these leaders, they have heart, they have humanity. And one of the things that we forget sometimes is that our political leaders are women and men that have struggles like we all do and live lives. And so what I understood from this was that here was Susan Collins, a woman I never met before, working as Abigail's auntie, but really truly working and trying to help bring home all of these people, all the women and children, and all of the hostages. Because if you keep in mind that Abigail was one of 35 children who were stolen that morning, there were hundreds and hundreds of people that were victims, and there were tens and tens of infants and children who were murdered that day. And so what, for me, I understood was that people related, and when people could relate, it didn't matter what their political position was or their religion, it brought them in as humans. And Abigail, for 51 days after everything, was with this beautiful woman named Hagar Brodich, and she was with her 3 children and Abigail. And she was with Abigail as if she was her 4th child, hugging her in silence, loving her without food, taking care of her without hygiene. She took care of Abigail like one of her own. And with this belief that her husband and her community were gone, she gave hope to all these children. So no matter how horrible it was, because Abigail knew her parents were killed that day. 3 years old, she knew, she saw. And Hagar gave her what I call, she saved her soul that day. And that she saved Abigail's soul for 51 days. So when Abigail was released, she had been loved amidst the horror, and it was horrific what they went through. And I think about Michael and Amalia, a 6 and 9-year-old, locked in a closet for 14 hours before they were rescued. And this beautiful woman named Tamar spoke to them and talked to them and took care of them and kept them going, saving their souls, so that when they were released, they had been alone, but they had had somebody caring for them on a cell phone, on a mobile phone, but still caring for them. There was no time not to be hopeful. Okay, hope is, it's like an adjective, a verb, a noun. It is what we all need to keep inside of us. And look, I don't know if people pray, people, what they do, but the minute you lose hope, then you have despair. And despair does not get us anywhere. And the minute you let hate take over hope, we go back to what happened on October 7th. That was hate. So I think the answer is that I woke up every morning and I said, what can I do? I went back to bed every night and said, what else could I have done? But if I could say one thing, that in the darkness and in all of this terrible year and a half that we've gone through, the amount of people and their love and support for myself and other families has been really incredible. And I have been so inspired and so embraced by so many different people. And while we know there's a lot of hate in this world, and we know there's been a lot of anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism and people that decided to have a different belief of what happened on October 7th against all the facts, the thing that I keep holding on to is the majority of people are good and they care. It was a combination when I heard that Abigail made it on the third day of, oh my God, this is the greatest news because she is coming out. And then you stopped and you thought, okay, what could go wrong? And what I learned early on was until you see your person, this little child or anybody that's your hostage, you don't really believe it. So it was, I'd say about 18 hours. You know, you try to sleep a little bit, but you can't. And then you wake up because you think, okay, they're going to come out early. Okay, you want to be there. And so you just wait and you wait and you wait. And I will say that President Biden called myself and my brother-in-law in Israel to tell us that Abigail had actually passed into Israel. But even until I saw Abigail in my niece and my sister-in-law's arms, I didn't believe it. I didn't believe she was free. But when I saw her in Liron's arms with my sister-in-law next to her, Shlomit, I thought, okay, I can breathe. We met with Democrats and Republicans in the House and the Senate because all these people were involved and they've been involved. And we've kept it so that our political system in America doesn't get one side or the other for the hostages or for Israel or for any topics that have to do with the Jewish people in America because we really want to keep us together. And we've managed very nicely for the most part. We met with people in the White House. We met with people in the hostage families that have done the work. We met with Adam Bowler. We met with Deputy Special Envoy Morgan Ortugas, who works with Steve Witkoff. And what we were doing was continuing to tell our stories. And now Liron and Zoli, my niece and nephew, talked about what they experienced on October 7th, which I want people to read the book, because this tells the truth. And what I understood was, here was a family that had never been to Washington, D.C. And in 3 days, all they did all day long, 6 kids, was go from meeting to meeting to meeting to advocate. And in their case, you talked about the relationship. Ziv and Gali Berman, twins, 26 years old, are now hostages for 585 days. And you see these children telling leaders in America about their neighbors. That's what we do. That's what it means to take care of your people. And that means to fight for them. And when you see little kids and Abigail talking about the Berman twins, it tells you. It's pretty heartwarming and it's pretty inspiring. I had been in Kfar Aza for many, many years, but for happy occasions. And for myself and for my family, this was a place where kids could run free. They could go to and play with the animals. They could go and it was heaven for children. And we had spent so much time there. And then I knew what happened on October 7th. And I was like, I have to go back. Because one of the things that I realized was that back in America and all the work I was doing was I was bearing witness. And if I hadn't gone and seen the place, then I wouldn't be able to accurately talk about it, but also defend people that said things that weren't true about October 7th. So for me, it was about going there, and it was really hard. It was to be in the home and to see the devastation of what they did, not only And yes, they killed her in front of her children, but then they went and they just destroyed the place. And so for me, it was going there. It was seeing the homes that were burned. It was also going to the home where Lorenzoli survived, and their house hadn't been burned, but the house next door had been. The people next door had been murdered. So their house didn't show on the inside, but on the outside of every building, there was like graffiti, and people, different organizations that came in had marked what had happened in that house, that somebody had been murdered, someone had been kidnapped. They also marked if they had cleaned it for explosives. So when you walk around this kibbutz and you see this community that's beautiful and green, and then you see these markings and you know that every house had terrorists in it. I don't think everybody can do it. And my niece Liron thought, why are you going there? You're crazy. But I also understood that unless we can understand what truly happened that morning, and not from the news, but ourselves, it makes it hard to, like I said, bear witness. Abigail inspires people to do their work. Abigail goes inside the Senate building and sits with senators. These people that are out there making all this work, and you see these senators drawing with Abigail and her siblings. That's pretty special. We all have a responsibility to make sure that all the hostages come home. And, you know, there's campaigns till the last one. But I think one of the things that I've learned for our family, and you've asked this question, is that we were able to move forward with tragedy and with trauma. But we've moved forward because Abigail came home. Until these families have their loved ones come home, and we saw the Alexander family just now, Yael and Adi couldn't move forward. They had to live every life day because they had children, but they haven't been able to move forward, and the grandparents and the cousins. And now, because Idan is home, they can start to move forward. But the 58 people that haven't come home, their families can't move forward. And I say the nation of Israel cannot move forward. And I say the diaspora of Jews, but I say humanity, human beings. We can't simply move forward. We need them to come home. We need to begin the healing from that moment and then to move forward. So when you ask, is there anything more? Yeah, we all have to keep telling their stories and keep fighting for their lives and making sure that not only that it's safe in Israel, but it's safe in the region for all the children. I truly believe this is that moment. It's a moral moment. It is not a one religion. It's about all religion, but it's about all people. What do we want our world to be like for the children? You have 3 children. I want your children, Abigail and all the children, living in Gaza, living in the region, living here in Australia, to have a life that isn't going to be about war and hate. So for me, this is about how do we share love, how do we share heart and humanity, and how do we move forward?